Hi everybody, it's Jordan here. We have Brian back with us, and what we're going to do is continue on that wealth report. So as we talked about we talked about that longevity risk, outliving our money, and we showed you guys comparisons when it comes to max funded life insurance versus those other buckets that we look at, contributing our retirement accounts to. So what we're going to do now is continue within that wealth report since it has so much information, and we're going to focus on the costs. Brian's going to talk to us more about that cost analysis, and that's something that we get a lot of questions on, and Brian does too, is the fact that everyone out there, we've heard that life insurance is expensive, and so what we want to do is dispel those myths. We want to talk about it. We want to put that on the table so that you guys do understand those life insurance costs, but then we also want you to understand that there's more than just those life insurance costs as well when looking at our retirement account. So Brian's going to spend some time on that wealth report, so I appreciate you coming back, Brian.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jordan. Now, a couple quick points before we get started in the wealth report. As Jordan mentioned, that there are those media personalities and authors who often say life insurance is too expensive and not buy permanent insurance and instead buy term insurance. I do want to address that in today's video because I think it's a very important misconception, and one of the big points I want to drive home is the fact that you don't want to follow mass marketed financial advice, which may not be meant for you, and there may be more specific advice, which we'll talk about, for people, especially with uncommon income amounts. So again, with Richard and Grace Turner, and really for you at home, when you're choosing what places to put your money, there's three big risks that we talked about, longevity already. We're actually going to talk today about tax risk. Now, taxes are one of the biggest costs that you will incur in your lifetime, not only on the income you make, but also on the assets or the vehicles that you choose to put your money. So I think when we talk about cost, it's important to address taxes as well, as that's one of the biggest costs that you will incur.
So not just the vehicle that we're putting our money into, but the actual tax costs that's on top of that as well.
Absolutely. So what I want to do is get in a little bit more about Kevin's conversation about individuals with uncommon income amounts to kind of further our discussion. And we're going to talk about the top 1, 5, 10, and 25% of individuals. And these people, like Kevin mentioned, pay 86% of the nation's income taxes, which is a very startling amount. Now the masses, who a lot of that mass-marketed financial advice is meant for and directed to, the bottom 75%, these individuals don't have tax problems. Instead, they have cash flow problems. And for these individuals, buying term insurance is often the solution because they're able to get a good amount of temporary coverage just so, if they don't make it home after work one night, their spouse or their kids or loved ones are protected. For these individuals, again, cash flow is their biggest concern. Now for you at home and for us and for the top 25% people with uncommon income amounts, their situation is a little different and they have tax problems. So it's important, again, to address the fact that mass marketed financial advice where people say to buy term, invest the difference and not buy permanent insurance is meant for the masses, not for us or you at home.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing by any means, and a lot of times we'll use term insurance in our planning for that protection, for that coverage. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Brian, on that one.
So we're going to get back into Richard and Grace Turner and talk about their wealth report. And again, there's so much information on this report. One of the things we're going to talk to you about right now is taxes and costs, and when looking at their vehicle that we use compared to other financial alternatives that they could be considering. So when we look at their wealth report and look at a summary of values at age 85, you can see that the total taxes they paid on the accumulation years and distribution years in their life insurance policy was zero. Now, what would happen if tax rates doubled? What would effect that would have on that number?
It'd still be zero.
Absolutely. We essentially insulated a portion of our assets from the legislative risk that taxes are likely to go higher and probably likely to go higher for the wealthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've essentially gotten that tax expense out of the way because we've paid taxes today while we have some of the deductions that we've talked about in the past and gotten that out of the way to eliminate one of our expenses in our contracts.
We pay the taxes on the seed, not the harvest.
That's a good point.
Now, in order to have all these tax favor treatments that the IRS has bestowed upon us on these life insurance policies, we do incur costs. There are life insurance policy charges that essentially go to pay for the income tax-free life insurance policy for our family. And at age 85, we've paid $216,000 in total charges. Now, looking at that in a vacuum, you may think, well, that's a lot of money in expenses. But again, it's important. People make their best financial decisions when confronted with a comparison. We want to look at how much costs and taxes you would pay in a different vehicle, taxable, tax deferred, and possibly a tax exempt as well. So let's go ahead and get into it here. We're going to again compare the life insurance costs and taxes versus the three alternatives. And we paid at age 85 $216,000 in total expenses for our life insurance benefit. Now that represented about 25% of the contributions that we made into our policy.
Yeah, and that was the 19-year period. We paid $46,000 a year with the Turner. So that's where we got that $874,000 of total premium that we've paid into that contract.
Great point. Now, again, like I mentioned, if we just look at that in a vacuum, that sounds like a lot, but we have to compare. Let's look at a taxable bucket. At age 85, we paid $250,000 in expenses, which could be investment expenses or costs to having somebody manage your money. In addition, we paid $409,000 in taxes on the growth that we experienced over the life of that taxable bucket, a total of $660,000 in taxes and expenses. And if we look at that, that's 75% of the contributions that we funded in, 3 times the amount that we would pay for the life insurance policy charges, which went for the death benefit for our family.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to understand that there aren't just costs associated to the product that you choose, but there's costs from a taxation standpoint, not only during your accumulation phase, but also during your distribution phase. It's incredible that 75% of your money is going just towards covering that taxation and cost to keep that thing going.
That's a great point. And given the option, what would you rather have your costs go to? A life insurance policy for your wife or your son, or to the investment broker and to Uncle Sam? Now you think that's bad. Let's now look at the tax deferred bucket, which would be your 401k or IRA. And as Jordan mentioned, we talked about the wealth accumulation vehicles. The major benefit for these vehicles is the tax deferment and basically the tax postponement on your contributions. So with a 401k, you're not paying the taxes on the seed and instead paying it on the harvest. Now, it's pretty startling, but we paid about $590,000 in investment expenses using conservative assumptions and $1.3 million in taxes on the distribution phase. And I think the important thing to point out is the fact that this assumes tax rates today. If tax rates doubled, now we just doubled our taxes that we'll have to pay. If we take a look at our total expenses that we incur and the taxes that we'll pay, almost $2 million in total expenses. And if we look at that, it's 220% of the initial contributions that we made. We're paying more in taxes to Uncle Sam and investment expenses to the broker, the mutual fund companies, than the actual investment contribution amounts themselves. Now to kind of look at that visually again here, you can see from a longevity standpoint, tax deferred, tax exempt, and tax free, they all ran out of gas, which is why they aren't going to age 95. And also we can see that even at this point, our total charges are significantly higher over the long run as when compared to the life insurance policy. There's
one thing that I do want you to focus on here as well. It's kind of hard to see, but Brian's making a little square on that. And what you'll see here is that green line, which is our life insurance, our maximum funded life insurance, is a little bit higher initially. And again, we're looking at it from a longevity standpoint. So when we look at life insurance in the small picture of, okay, the first year, the first 5 years, the majority of the cost in our life insurance contract is associated in the first couple years.
Yep.
And so once we get past that point, we have that compounding interest still working for us, and if we get those costs out of the way, that allows our compounding interest to be uninterrupted and to continue to grow. And like Brian mentioned, I mean, one of the biggest benefits you get for life insurance from day one when I make my first premium is what?
The death benefit.
Is the death benefit. I mean, how important is it to protect your families? Both Brian and I have families, and it's amazing to know that we're putting money away in a vehicle that's not only going to secure our retirement future, but it's also securing our future right now for our families if something were to happen to us. And so I'm glad to pay that premium knowing that that cost is going towards covering life insurance, the death benefit, as well as giving us all of these benefits that we're after with our savings account. So awesome. This was great information, Brian. Thank you. And Brian's going to stick around because we have one more thing to go over when it comes to our wealth report. And we've looked at longevity risk. We've looked at cost. Now what we want to look at is market returns. And we want to compare, again, do that comprehensive analysis of how does the market return, how does our interest rate returns compare with our maximum funded life insurance as well as our other buckets. So Brian's going to come back and talk about that.
It's really important to get started. Today is the best time to do so. The longer you wait, the more these problems are going to compound in your life. And just by filling out a few-page confidential form, get that over to your trusted advisor, and he and she can put together the support and really create all these meaningful benefits to both you and your family.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. We'll
Thanks.
see you guys in the next video.